You know things are bad when Hitler is in the news. This week, when the U.S. government texted the faculty of Barnard College asking for all the Jews to identify themselves, history professor Nera Milanich said, "We've seen this movie before, and it ends with yellow stars." The Atlantic published 2 Nazi-related stories this week, one about Hitler's tariffs, and another about a study of German people's dreams about authoritarianism in the 1930s. The Forward has an article titled "Trump Nominee Apologizes for Praising Nazi Sympathizer While Awaiting Senate Confirmation Hearing." And of course, Larry David wrote an op-ed for the New York Times called "My Dinner with Adolf." Comparisons to Nazis and the Holocaust abound these days. Many Americans have compared our current political situation to 1930s Germany. Israelis see parallels between the hostages in Gaza and Jews in concentration camps. Vladimir Putin repeatedly claims that Ukraine is run by Nazis, and Israel itself has been accused of perpetrating a genocide in Gaza. In the midst of all of this, we observe Yom Hashoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, this week. Remembering and learning about the Holocaust has long been a fraught subject, even before recent current events. How can we possibly do justice to the immensity of the trauma and loss? Whose stories should be highlighted and which facts emphasized? Should we focus on memorializing the victims or on learning lessons so as not to repeat the past? How do we understand other persecution and oppression in light of the Holocaust? And what effect does the Holocaust have, or should it have, on our identities as Jews? For 80 years, we've been grappling with these questions. There are no easy answers, of course, but I do think there are some common pitfalls, very familiar, very tempting, but we should try to avoid falling into when we think about the Holocaust. The first pitfall is instrumentalizing the Holocaust, using it to further a particular agenda. In previous generations, and perhaps in some families today, parents have used the Holocaust to guilt trip their children. If you were told that because of the horrors of the Holocaust, you were obligated to go to shul, have a bar mitzvah, marry a nice Jewish boy or girl, have lots of Jewish babies, you're not alone. And while I'm for doing all those things, should you so choose, it's not because the Holocaust gives these acts meaning. Jewish continuity cannot be based entirely on survivors' guilt. Fortunately, it seems less common now for Jewish parents to guilt trip their children, at least in this particular way. But it's still common to use the Holocaust in other ways, like to shut down legitimate debate, such as questions about Israel's actions in Gaza. It's grotesque when people casually refer to anyone they don't like as a Nazi, or anyone who experiences any kind of hardship as being like a Jew in a concentration camp. To use the Holocaust for any agenda, even a good and important one, is to trivialize the event and make light of the suffering of the victims. The second pitfall is to focus too much on searching for redemption in the Holocaust. In our attempts to avoid facing its horrors, we can too easily turn our attention to the stories that make us feel better. So, for example, sometimes communities use Yom Hashoah to highlight the heroes of the Holocaust, either the righteous Gentiles who helped Jews survive, or the Jews who fought in the resistance. In fact, the official name of the holiday, created by Israel in the 1950s, is Yom Hashoah v'Hagvura, the Day of the Holocaust and Heroism. As the author Dara Horn notes, International Holocaust Remembrance Day, which is observed in January, commemorates the date of the Allied forces liberating Auschwitz. Yom HaShoah is exactly the opposite. The day's full Hebrew name is Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, or Holocaust and Heroism Day. Its spring date does not commemorate Jews being liberated by others, but rather the heroic and doomed Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Its place on the Jewish calendar shortly after Passover was not merely to avoid conflicting with the biblical holiday, but also to connect it to the modern Israeli observances of Yom HaZikaron, Israel's Memorial Day, and Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. Each also charged commemorations of Jews as actors shaping their own collective destiny. Mourn argues that framing the holiday as Yom Hashoah v'Hagvura better acknowledges Jewish victims' agency and therefore dignity. She might be right, but I think this approach is dangerous. By focusing too much on heroism, we risk suggesting that only heroic lives are worth remembering. And worse, that Jews who didn't resist in some way deserve their fate. And the third pitfall, or the third lesson, is when we draw lessons from the Holocaust, we should do so with humility, acknowledging that there are many ways to try to learn from this unfathomable event. Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer, president of the Shalom Hartman Institute, points out how different Jews understand the lessons of the Holocaust, using the famous teaching from Pirkei Avot as a frame. Hillel said, "If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when?" Here's what he says. Some in the Jewish community understand the primary legacy of how we remember the Holocaust as manifesting in the moral obligation that we remain vigilant as a people against the next threat from wherever it may come. The Holocaust signified the worst of our vulnerability as a people. If we will not be for ourselves, who will be for us? Others in the Jewish community deploy the metaphor in memory of the Holocaust, not without some verve and risk, as a cautionary tale for the Jewish people and how we exercise power over others. The memory of victimhood creates an impulse to compensate, as an abuse victim can become an abuser. There is an emerging voice in our community that cautions us not to allow our memory to become an echo chamber in which we become deaf to the emergence of our own power as a people and to our changing role in history. If we are only for ourselves, what are we? And yet, still others translate the memory of Jewish victimhood to a broad moral obligation that we become the primary actors in the world to prevent genocide wherever it materializes, to embody a culture of urgency that no one else can understand quite as well as we do. We learn from our trauma that someone must stand for injustice wherever it appears, and it had best be us. If not now, when? He concludes, memory of our trauma then animates a culture of self-preservation, a fear of excess self-aggrandizement, and a sense of global responsibility. Which is the real Jewish memory? Kurtzer's asking a rhetorical question here, of course, because the answer is all of them. All three answers are authentic, reasonable lessons to learn from the Holocaust. It would probably be best for us to hold all three at once, as much as we possibly can. But alongside holding on to these three lessons, I would argue that we should never forget our first responsibility on this and every Yom HaShoah, which is simply to remember and mourn. Remember and mourn, without trying to explain, interpret, justify, or categorize. Remember and mourn. The 6 million Jews, the 11 million human beings, whose lives were cruelly, brutally cut short. Each life was precious, unique, and irreplaceable to their loved ones and to God. May we never forget. Shabbat Shalom.